our Redeemer.
Amen.
My husband's parents were lifelong, strong, people of the book. Having gone to Sunday school from little up to the age of over 90, they were in the class where one woman told me the only promotion was to heaven. They knew the Bible inside out. And I really envied and respected them that knowledge. One evening at dinner, I turned to my father-in-law and said, "What's your favorite book of the Bible?" He thought only a moment. And he said, "Well, it has to be Acts. That tells us about the apostles in the early church." Now, I thought about that comment all through our Easter season, because if you pay close attention, you've noticed that we're not reading from the Hebrew Scriptures during the season between Easter and Pentecost. We're reading in the book of Acts. And we have had some amazing stories. First, there's Paul's dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus. Then, Peter raises Tabitha. And this week, we have Paul in prison when the gates are thrown open by an earthquake. Pretty dramatic stories. Pretty interesting history. I understand why my father-in-law loved this book. But you know, I think the book of Acts is more than history and more than good stories. I think it has valuable lessons for us here at St. Peter's today. You see, in the book of Acts, Peter and Paul are starting out on missionary journeys. They are going to put things in their backpacks that will help them as evangelists, and as we will see, they're going to take some things out of their backpacks and leave them behind. I think the two visions that we have read about in the last week can be valuable in offering us guidance at St. Peter's as we begin a journey into a new phase of a life and this congregation. Last week, Tom said that Christians enjoy visions in the early church. Now, a great thing about Scriptures is that the visions that inspired Peter and Paul can be visions that we can be inspired by if we use a little imagination. So today, I want to talk with you about those visions and how we can learn from what Peter and Paul experienced. First, Peter. Peter was the leader of the church in Jerusalem, a devout Jew. He was telling people that if they wanted to be Christ followers, they had to become Jewish first. That meant that the males had to be circumcised and that everybody had to follow the dietary law. Well, Peter had a vision. It was of a sheep coming from heaven, and it was filled with animals, in particular with birds of prey and lizards. Now, birds of prey and lizards were things strictly forbidden as food for devout Jews. So not surprisingly, when Peter sees that sheet and hears the word "kill and eat," he says, "No, Lord, by no means. Nothing profane has ever crossed my lips." And the voice answers sternly, "What I have called clean, you do not call profane." It takes Peter a while, but he finally realizes that the message is symbolic. You see, the message is telling him that there are things he has to get beyond, things he has to leave behind in order to be an evangelist. In particular, he has to abandon the idea that you must become Jewish in order to be a Christ follower. He loved those customs of his people, which they had practiced for centuries. But Peter realized that as much as he loved those customs, those ways of doing things, he had to take them out of his backpack and leave them if he was to go forward and spread the gospel. A very valuable lesson, as it turned out, for Peter and the church. Recently, an article I read by a man named Tom Rainer, who's a specialist in church growth, brought this lesson home to me in modern terms. He wrote an article entitled "The Autopsy of a Deceased Church." As a consultant, he had been called into a church and he reflected on the lessons he learned as he watched the church after he spoke with them decline until it finally closed its doors. He had 11 observations, but one of them stood out for me. He said, you know, that church idolized its way of doing things. It wanted to keep on doing the things it was doing, refusing to acknowledge that the community around it had changed. It clung to tradition, even to the point of death. Now, for those of us who like tradition, this is a little scary. You know, we like doing things the way we do things. And I certainly would not advocate that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. But let me give you an example of a church that failed to listen to this lesson in a small way, but in an important way. The church I attended in Las Vegas for most of my time there had the world's worst bulletin. Hands down, no contest, okay? It was a one-page sheet that was a bare outline of the service. This required people in the congregation keep the one-page outline, the Book of Common Prayer, and the hymnal all in play. It was like a juggling act. Now, my brothers and sisters, I'm a lifelong Episcopalian. No hill for a stepper for me. But I took a graduate student of mine to church with me. She was a very bright woman, a lifelong Lutheran who was used to some liturgical complexity, and she was a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of St. Olaf College. She went to the service and afterwards she said, Martha, I don't see how you know where you are in that service. A bright woman couldn't follow the order of service in that church. I took this story back and shared it with the people in the congregation, and you know what they said to me? Well, we're not going to change our bulletin. Part of being an Episcopalian is learning how to juggle those books. If they want to be like us, they got to learn our books. That church clung to its bare-bones bulletin, even at the expense of being able to spread the gospel in new places. Paul's lesson was he had to take things out of his backpack and leave them behind, even if he loved them, in order to be prepared for his journey. Another vision shaped Paul on his second missionary journey. Paul had his itinerary set. He practically had his reservation. He decided he was going to go into the area that is now Northeast Turkey. Now, you have to imagine you're looking at a map with me. So he was going to go this way to Northeast Turkey. Then he heard a voice that said, no, Paul. He heard a voice calling him to Macedonia, which was this way, 180 degrees different. And Paul decided he had to go to Macedonia to answer their call, the call in his vision. Now, not only did he have to go in a different direction than he had planned, he had to do things quite differently than he anticipated. You see, our last 2 weeks tell us that Paul did not find his convert in the synagogue. He had to go new places, do things in a new way. Last week, we heard how he went down by a river where Lydia and a group of women were sitting and praying, and he found his first convert was Lydia, a seller of purple cloth, by a river, not in a synagogue. And today, we hear about his second convert, a man who's guarding him in jail. Paul had to go to quite different places to find new people to spread the gospel. These two visions tell us that sometimes as we prepare for a journey, we have to leave things behind and we have to put new things in to be prepared to move forward. In fact, my brothers and sisters, growth never comes from staying the same. Growth only comes from change and adaptation. Now, we at St. Peter's are embarking on a new phase of our journey together. For the last year, we have lived under the shadow of a tragedy, a terrible tragedy. None of us will ever forget Brenda and Mary Marguerite, but this church has come through a year of getting its bearings and of grieving quite honestly. Now God is calling us to go to Macedonia. That means that we have to heed the lessons of those early apostles to think about what we need to leave behind what we may need to do differently in order to prosper and grow. So the questions that Peter and Paul leave us with are, what might we need to leave behind? What habits of mind? What attitudes? What things that we love doing the way we do them, and we need to be willing to change or leave behind to move forward. And Paul asked us, what new ways of doing things, what new ministries, what new places may we need to go in order to move forward. Recently I saw an article by a Lutheran minister in which he said, we are not going to be a welcoming church anymore. Now that set me back on my heels. How could you not be a welcoming church? But I read the article and he said this. He said, when you're a welcoming church, you stand at the door and you wait for people to come by or come in, and then you're nice to them. He said, we're going to be an inviting church. We're going to go where people are, and we're going to invite them to come with us, and we're going to listen to what they say, and be willing to give up some things that we may like a lot in order to have them join us in our worship. So, my brothers and sisters, I invite you to think about yourself individually and this community collectively. Envision us as going on a journey. We have to pack a backpack. What grievances, prejudices, bad experiences, attitudes do we need to leave behind? And what new ways of going places do we need to put into our backpacks in order to be prepared for the next phase of our journey? Make no mistake about it. God has called us to go to Macedonia. Maybe not where we would have planned to go or how we would have planned to go. But the invitation from Peter and Paul is to examine our hearts and think